And we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 86 of Global Citizens. My name is Calvin. I am the show's host. And of course, I am also its creator. So, my guest for today is, I believe, somebody who might have shared the same kind of experience with me. And also, luckily, she also actually live in the same city as me, which is why we can start at 11 a.m. It's actually been a while that I have somebody in the exact same time spot. So my guest for today is Ms Natasha Sondakh. Natasha is an award-winning Indonesian writer whose work has been published in multiple literary magazines, which includes the Kudeta Mag, Helicon Literary and Arts Magazine, and Eunoia Review. She was further recognized for her writing by the University of Iowa, Columbia University, and Alliance for Young Artists and Writers with her poem Lantern on display at the Art.Write.Now exhibition in New York City. So Natasha has also served on editorial boards of various print and online publications. She's also my seventh TEDx speaker, as she is a TEDx speaker for the TEDxJIS 2018 and Nine Live podcast for her work in translating Indonesian short story. And just in addition, when she isn't writing, you can find Natasha exploring local shops and restaurants with her friends. Otherwise, she will likely be on her couch surfing Korean dramas on Netflix with her dogs, Ollie, Harvey, and Hoshi. So, with that, without further ado, I will pass the platform back to her. Hi, Natasha. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, Calvin. How are you?
All right, all right. So, yeah, for those of you who are tuning into this thing for the very first time, Global Citizens is an online platform that primarily represents third culture kids such as myself and Natasha, because for both of us, we grow up in between different countries, and well, it could also be due to our mixed heritage or any kind of representation of it. Though over the time, it has also been a platform for the multicultural community for representation of them. Is because I want people to understand that this is not an extended vacation. It's a life whereby we constantly need to adapt. We need to change ourselves in order to fit into a certain kind of environment. Is because, well, we want to ingratiate ourselves. So without further ado, we will begin this. All right, Natasha, this is going to be your very first question, and compulsory for all TCK. Some people may like it, some people may not like it. Please give me your definition of home.
Home, honestly, for me, home is Jakarta. Just because it's related to, I grew up here most of my life, and I'm lucky enough to be able to define it easier than other TCKs. But I think for me personally, home really, what matters in a home is really the people. So, for example, I pretty much grew up in Jakarta all my life. Like, I studied here. I, have all my roots here. My parents are, basically from Indonesia as well, although different parts of Indonesia. So I feel very Indonesian, so home is pretty easy for me to define. But to say that I'm 100% Indonesian, though, would be completely inaccurate because I grew up with roots in like Chinese, Dutch, and also American culture since I currently attend an American university too. So I kind of have these little pickpockets of cultures that I'm a part of and that I associate with. So yeah, home is Jakarta, but to say that I'm purely Indonesian would just be inaccurate.
Okay, fair enough,
Yeah.
fair enough. Okay, this is actually the first time I can have somebody with a direct, straight answer. Okay, this is
Yeah.
actually the first time. So usually everybody will give me, oh, it's for the people and of course for their loved ones. So I have to twist it a bit in order to find out the certain affiliation to it.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, in your social media, you write you are 75% Chinese and 12.5% each for Dutch, and what is the other one again? Sorry.
Indonesia.
Yeah, Indonesian. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so mind telling us what is your experience like growing up in your household, and what is your profile in this?
Yeah. So, as I said, my parents are basically from Indonesia, but they kind of have different ethnic backgrounds. So, my father's mom, who's my paternal grandmom, is half Dutch and half Chinese. Ooh, sorry. Half Dutch, half Indo. And my paternal grandfather is Chinese. So my dad grew up basically in an ethnic Chinese, but also like Dutch household. So he kind of grew up in between Holland and Surabaya, which is a city in East Java. And my mom basically grew up in a Chinese household, like a Chinese Indonesian household in Surabaya. And when she was about, I think, 9, she moved to Singapore. And that's where she really like grew more into her, yeah, kind of similar to your story, actually, Calvin.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's where she kind of learned more about her Chinese side, I guess, and also her Indonesian side was when she moved to Singapore and she had to, learn English on her own. She learned Chinese on her own, which was a very inspiring story. So I grew up basically with their frames of references in mind, if that makes sense. So, but in addition to that, I was born in the U.S. and we still have family there, so we go to the U.S. pretty often. When I was still in high school, we went like I think twice a year. Um, and later on, when I graduated from high school, I decided to go to college in the U.S. and I currently attend Northwestern University in Illinois. So I live there. Supposed to be there now, but COVID means I'm here.
yeah,
So
yeah. We're not gonna get into too much detail on that. That's
yeah, let's
another
not.
more
It's
story about that.
sad.
It's hard
Yeah,
to hear that. I've
yeah.
actually been, yeah, it's really sad about what's going down in the US, in the good old USA now. But hopefully, it's gonna be better. Hopefully, yeah. All
Hopefully,
right.
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, as you guys actually saw the title, "Smelling of Turmeric," yeah, the earlier part. It's actually a book that Natasha is working on. It's going to be released in April 2021. Yes.
Yes.
All right. Do you mind telling us about it? Because I actually confused your profile when I was producing the show. Is because, oh wait, so the story of this fictional character is your life, okay? And then I accidentally put the wrong title. And thank God you notified me about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess I could start with a brief synopsis of the book.
Right.
So essentially the book is about this American-born Indonesian woman. Her name is Cecilia Poetry. And throughout her life, she's essentially heard of her father, raving about his home country of Indonesia. But then they moved when she was a kid and she doesn't really know why. So after he passed away, during like when she was in her college years, she decided to move to Jakarta and actually finally get a chance to experience this Indonesian culture that her father has been talking about all these years. So she moves to Jakarta, like leaves her mom behind in LA, and she moves in with her wealthy grandparents who are her father's parents. And very traditional, culturally Chinese Indonesian grandparents, they try to shape her into becoming like the ideal Indonesian granddaughter, whatever that means. And along the way,
Basically,
she also
you
learned.
have to marry by the time before you are 30.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and over time, she also just kind of figures out that her grandparents, like something went wrong between her grandparents and her parents. And she also learned that they really don't like her American lifestyle. So she's driven away and she, hangs out with her friends and colleagues who are in a very high Indonesian, like Chinese Indonesian society. So they are rich, they're beautiful, and they're really successful. And she just can't measure up to them. And she feels a lot of imposter syndrome as a result. But as the novel progresses, you'll see that Cecilia's relationship with Jakarta becomes a bit complicated because she finally sees that what she sees on the surface isn't exactly what is reflected in real life. So yeah, and then she just kind of figures out that nothing is really as it seems, and that's when the story really takes off. Yeah.
Fun trivia: Cecilia is actually my sister's name.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's actually my sister's name, but
Actually,
she has a
it's
different
kind of
spelling for
funny.
it.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, because
And
in Indonesian culture, right? Like a lot of parents like to name their kids with the same like first letter, right? You know, like Calvin and
yeah,
Cecilia. Yeah.
yeah.
Is that the case with you?
Fun fact for my case, I'm named after Macaulay Culkin's character from Home Alone.
Oh no way.
Yeah, I'm named after him. My and one more funny fact is that my name could have been Angus, as in MacGyver, Angus MacGyver. So
Oh
my
yeah,
dad is a big fan of characters who can think outside the box. And at that time, when I was born, he was a big fan of MacGyver, and I really thought I was going to be named Angus, but thank God I'm not. Yeah,
yeah.
Macaulay Culkin's character, the Home Alone, Kevin, actually came out, and after that, he's like, okay, I'll name my son after him. But since everybody is using that exact same name or some variation of it, he decided to take it a little bit further, which is how my name came about. So yay, that's an
That's
interesting.
good to hear.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, back to your book though. I can safely say I definitely would love to check it out. It's because, in a
Thanks.
sense, that is a reflection of my own life. Growing up in Singapore, a developed country, whereby everything is done according to the book. It's done easily. There's a rule set standard in place. All you have to do is just execute it.
Yeah.
It was really a gigantic change when I actually do came back to Indonesia. And regarding what you mentioned on like the fictional character Cecilia's, when she is exposed to her colleagues, all of the pretty people in the environment, that was something that I actually encountered at that time. Is because this is not the kind of environment that I'm actually exposed to, because most of my time in Singapore, I already have a certain set group of friends that I'm familiar with, that
Mhm.
I know what they like to do, and then suddenly, well, I'm back in a place that's supposed to be my home. But the thing is
Yeah.
that I have no idea about it. I have no idea at all about it. And the thing is that it's like I can go to the different type of click, and somehow there's always this kind of similarity in between them. So okay, this is definitely something worth reading, and
Thank
I
you.
think this is welcome. And this is something that actually a lot of people actually never understood, is because in Indonesia it's always known as the potential business ground, is because when the population is the fourth highest in the world, and well, there's of course potential for markets and etc. But the thing is that people never understood the culture, because
Yeah.
there's also that shallow surface in a sense. Sadly, is that it's always a I actually learned about this in from the recent coverage on the Asian attacks in the United States. There's an association that Asians are rich, which is not always true 100% of the time. It's a stereotype that was reinforced from last time in order to as a wedge campaign. So
Correct.
this is something that is definitely worth checking out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, my book also does touch a bit on classism and elitism that unfortunately does exist in Indonesia, just because the wealth gap, not gender wealth gap, sorry, I
yeah,
guess that too, but the wealth gap between the ultra rich and the ultra poor is
yeah.
huge. So there
It's
is
day, it's
definitely,
really day and night.
yeah, it's pretty bad. So you can definitely see it, I guess, in some areas. You see a lot of people being rude to waiters, for example, which is it seems like a small thing, but when you put it into perspective, right? You can't get to like if you're talking about the rich, yeah, like the upper middle class and even the middle class, like you can't you can't get to where you are without the people who are working for you. And there is although of course there's a good number of people who do appreciate the labor force, but unfortunately there are quite a number as well who are considerably rude, or just unappreciative of the people in the classes, the socioeconomic classes below them. and that really tugged at my heart. So I made sure to include something related to class and the wealth gap in the book.
All
Yeah.
right. Okay. Yeah. 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 I've experienced some of it. I've been back here now for 3 years. So yeah, I've actually seen some of these issues. And one more thing that you can kind of see is that there's a certain level of boundaries that sometimes that in Indonesia people tend to not want to people tend to ignore. For one thing is that, for example, I think around a year ago, I actually was having a meal with a friend of mine from Bali and another person who just happened to tag along with us at that time because we were attending a networking event. So what happened was that my friend's meal actually arrived super late, and we actually need to ask them, hey, why isn't his food arrived yet? And afterwards, they told us, oh, apparently it's out of stock, and you didn't even tell us about it. And when I told my parents about it, they told me, yeah, you are wrong. You are supposed to be the one who you are supposed to be the one who asked it a lot earlier. So I was like, wait, what? Why am I wrong?
Yeah.
This is not even any kind. Is there any kind of way that I have to order? Because
Yeah.
it's just so simple. This guy is paid
Yeah.
to do this particular job. I actually am just asking for the order. Isn't it supposed to be done that way? So this is something that was really confusing. And yet, this is something actually worth noting for because this is a nation's first impression is at a public places like food or places whereby stories are able to be told. And
Yeah.
if it's not conveyed properly, it reflected poorly on the nation. So I definitely will be checking out your book, and I
Thank you.
really hope that it does well, as
Thank
I want
you.
people to as the main purpose of this kind of platform is actually to highlight about cultural differences and the importance of intercultural studies.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Even
Alright.
though, like the book is fictional, but I did draw a lot of my experiences, being abroad and then coming back, and
Right.
that kind of reverse culture shock that you kind of talked about earlier as well. Um, so I definitely see it, even though I didn't experience it as bad as Cecilia did. But it's real, and I think I hope your audience can appeal to it because even though I'm not the traditional TCK that like has lived in 10 different countries. The experience of cultural alienation is definitely a common thread among people who have come from international backgrounds, such as, both of us, right? Yeah.
Right. I agree. I agree.
Mhm.
I actually want to ask you this though. For being a TCK, what do you think has been the biggest blessing? And just to be fair, your biggest curse being one is because the thing is that Uh, I mean, well, both of us are born. Sorry, I'm born in Indonesia. You're born in the U.S., but you grow up here a lot longer than me. Sorry about that.
It's
The
okay.
thing is that uh, the thing is that Indonesia is that it's still a developing country, so the infrastructure, other than some places maybe like Surabaya or Bali, doesn't really accommodate the global mindset. And just to let you guys who are watching this know, as part of your cultural immersion, besides my house is actually a mosque, so you can hear the azan prayer. So yeah, sorry. So that is something that we all always struggle, I guess, is because when you grow up multiculturally or you grow up outside of it, and then when you come back here, you are supposed to you are supposed to ingratiate immediately, and people who look at you will expect you to already know what is going on because, well, that's your passport country.
Yeah.
But the thing is
Right.
that you are actually a lot more lost in it than them. And the thing is that when you feel lost as a TCK, you actually feel a lot worse. Is because you kind of questions everything about your existence. So yeah,
Correct.
but so yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you definitely touched on the curse. I don't want to call it a curse, but the negative aspects, I guess, of being a TCK. Definitely the cultural alienation, right? That
right,
piece is vital, especially when it comes to TCK's mental health. I went to an international school here, and I've met a lot of people who have moved like tons of times, and some of them have opened up to me and said that it's really lonely because you don't have like a sense of stability, if that makes sense. I have been fortunate enough to not experience that since, again, I've lived in Jakarta my entire life, but I do kind of relate in a sense of like feeling lost. Again, my life is pretty much a melting pot of different cultural identities. So to say that I'm purely Indonesian or like purely Chinese, purely Dutch, purely American, that's completely inaccurate. And not belonging in the different boxes that the world sets for you can be very suffocating, ironically. So that, I guess, is the biggest negative aspect. But the biggest blessing of being a TCK is actually being unique, not belonging in these boxes that the world sets for you. And that gives people like me an open mind. Like I know I'm sure you've experienced this on some level too, Kelvin, but I've met people in the US who don't even know what Indonesia is. I've met people who thought Indonesia was one single island with a coconut tree and that we don't have Wi-Fi, So I think being able to experience different world cultures, and we've also been fortunate enough to travel throughout my childhood and like my teen years. So having that privilege to see more of the world, to be exposed to different cultures, that keeps you open minded. And I think the most important part is that it makes you an empathetic person. So instead of being judgmental upfront about someone's culture or like someone's behavior, you take a step back and you realize, hold on, where is this person coming from, right? Like, what is their education level? What lies have they been exposed to in their life? And like what traumas have they experienced, and having this different perspective makes the world more human and in a way also more warm, even though it might not seem that way, especially now. So
fair enough, fair enough. Well,
yeah.
have you ever tell them actually in order to get to a location, you actually have to travel through boat everywhere?
Yeah, I've
Uh,
heard that
I've actually used that joke several times. Is
too.
because there was an old advertisement from RCTI last time whereby it's just some people on the boat and then the camera screenshot to an old man who is rowing, right? I
Yeah.
actually told them, oh, that's how I used to travel. Yeah, I used to travel a boat. Then I need to climb up a hill, and then I can get to a bus stop, then to go to a location. And during the location, the road is so bumpy that you have to make it like a demolition derby. So
That part's
it's
not entirely wrong, though. A lot of roads here are like that,
yeah, that's
you
true.
know.
That's true. And you know what's funny enough is that in the past they actually believe it. They
Very
actually believe.
serious.
Yeah, they actually believe it. Really? Yes. I told them that.
Um,
But well, after a while, when they actually do visited Indonesia, they're like, "Oh, hey, you lied to me." I'm like, who tell you to not be culturally aware?
yeah. I love that. I love that.
Thank you. Okay. I want to piggyback something on what you said on the term warmth. Yeah. So this is, in a sense, it's something that I've been doing for the past recent episode because the attack on the Asian American community is, well, it's all over the global news for one thing. But the thing is that it's not only in the United States itself;
Correct.
it's everywhere. It's countries that, well, a lot of Indonesian or Chinese Indonesian has immigrated to, or even Asians of all ethnicity, and it's Well, it's actually sadly happened here where we are currently at in the past in 1998.
Yeah.
And this negative stigma has plagued for quite a while, and it's really heartbreaking to see it. It's really, really heartbreaking to see it. So, how do you feel though the younger generation should take a stand moving forward? The reason being is that I think it's always a stereotype that Asian people are too quiet. We always try to avoid confrontation, and
Yeah.
in a sense, it's fair to say that, but that is the previous generation. We can't come to a new country. We can't move with different times, and yet we don't advance in how we represent ourselves. There's a lot of things that's going around nowadays that actually empower us to do it. But for your case, since this is I believe your, well, I'm slightly older than you, so it's still it's still our era, you can call it, I don't know. But the thing is that this your generation would have a lot more time on this. So what do you think though the younger generations of the Asian borns could do in order to be more seen worldwide, to not be ignored? And well, yeah, I'll just pass you that question first.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think generally the younger generation, and I'm saying this based on what I see on social media from my own personal networks and also just generally from my personal network. Um, so by younger generation, I may be biased and closed off to only seeing a certain bubble. So I just want to make that clear first before I dive into it further. But um, kind of a controversial opinion. I'm not sure how this is going to be received, but um, a lot of people have been doing a lot of Instagram activism, which I appreciate because it is informative. But with a lot of Instagram activism, it becomes difficult for them to act in the real world. So I'm very much someone who believes, who doesn't, well, I believe in activism. Yes, like, of course, it's important to educate and fight for something, but words without actions just falls flat, right? So
Right,
if you post all of these things on social media and you're like, okay, I did my part, that's not completely true because you haven't exactly done anything in like the real physical world to combat these things, right? But what these posts do, well, hopefully what it does is that it inspires conversations in different silos of communities. So some people have posted, you know, different things on Instagram or TikTok that have gone viral, even beyond the Asian communities. And that is a really positive thing. And obviously, it has to start somewhere, right? So there is a positive to it too, although I'm not very, 100% into it, if that makes sense. Like the whole Instagram activism movement, which started in COVID and maybe slightly before. But yeah, so I think the biggest thing that people like us can do is just to start conversations um, in their own communities and also to educate their non-Asian friends, right? Because the truth is, as you mentioned, anti-Asian racism has existed way before COVID and it has existed before 2021. It just was never covered, right? Like you can go way back to like the Vietnam War, and even that the concept of the Vietnam War itself is anti-Asian racism, right? And Asian fetishization too, right? Or
right,
most more commonly known as yellow fever, where white people perceive Asians as what you said, right? Meek, weak, fragile, frail, and we're not going to speak up. So we are especially Asian women, we are like the ideal wife, stay-at-home wife who will like never do anything. And that also has existed from way, way back then, since the 20th
right,
century and maybe even before. So I think the main issue here is that you kind of touched on this too, but I do want to put a label on it, which is the model minority myth.
right.
And that was coined by, I think, a white guy in like
Yeah,
the 18th
it's
century or something like that. Am
correct.
I saying it correctly? Um, yeah, and it
Just
basically,
to add on what Natasha said, okay. There's actually a video related to the Try Guys recent video. We need to talk about anti-Asian hate. So a lot of what we cover here, in fact, on model minority, the bamboo ceiling, in a sense, it's also actually being covered here. So guys, do please check it out. I actually watched it several times, and why I do so is because I feel that it is a wonderful documentary that is fair, and it's really elaborative on the entire history. And you guys please check it out. And no, I'm not making money out of this. I'm not trying to make anything out of this, because to me this is just something that weighs heavily on my mind. As somebody who served in the Singapore military when I was younger, carrying a gun is something that we are both proud of, and yet at the same time it terrifies us, is because you don't know when you can make a mistake. And having seen that impact that something can be used to take the life of someone who look like me, or even somebody who look like my loved ones, it is something that is haunting. Okay, it's really really haunting. Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Tasha, sorry,
No, it's
is there,
okay.
I think I missed out something on you, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to your point as well, like about just the fear that the Asian community has been experiencing so far. I mean, when the shooting in Georgia at the massage parlor happened, um, you know, I remember reading it. I woke up at like an ungodly hour and I opened Instagram and I saw it and I looked at the news and everything. And it was so overwhelming that I just couldn't even I didn't even know what to say, especially, since the police officer tried to defend the shooter and say that he was just having a bad day. That just I have no words for that. I just, it was just so disappointing and it's so haunting, that frankly speaking, I'm a little bit scared to go back to the US, you know. And
Right.
we've been taught, even before I went to college, my family has taught me self-defense, which is honestly, thinking back, pretty ridiculous because why the hell should I, like, why the hell must the world have come to this point that I need to learn self-defense to take care of myself, in a country that is supposed to protect me? But now I'm glad that I have these self-defense mechanisms. I also have pepper spray in my back in the US, just
Oh,
because, people are scared and they've been scared for years, especially women, right? So, yeah, I just want to piggyback on that and say I completely agree. Like, it's so scary to be targeted just because of the color of your skin. Like, it's not something you can control and it's not something that you do, right? And you see these videos of just pure violence and just agony of the Asian community, um, crying out because one of their own, and the elderly, the freaking elderly, who are very respected people in our community, right, just being slaughtered or assaulted. And it's just horrifying to see all of this happening, and know that you might be next. Um, so I share your pain, and I'm sure a lot of other Asians, especially in the places where these things are happening the most, where these hate crimes are happening the most, we all share your pain. And yeah, hope we can just take care of each other during this time.
all right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me ask a little bit. Yeah, for your case is, while you grow up in in Indonesia most of your life, you
Mhm.
spend considerable time also going back and forth in the U.S. Right?
Yeah.
How important do you feel though is in maintaining, or in a sense securing a route in both of in your homes, is because this is something that I tend to notice is TCKs do not have roots. That's always been one of our main stigma, is because you and I have been fortunate enough. We have two fixed places that we can call home. For your case, in fact, you actually are a lot more rooted in Indonesia.
Yeah.
but a lot of TCKs tend to have 10. I think the record on my show is 12 on living in different countries, growing up to the point that the person doesn't even know any other language besides English, since the way of speaking is combined with everything else, and it's so confusing to them. How
Yeah.
important do you feel is in establishing the roots where you're from? Because, and just to add on a little bit, in the not only in the Asian community, actually, there's 2020 there was the death of George Floyd. Just to add on,
Yeah.
why is it why is it such a difficulty for everyone to just accept that in the location it's a root? Everybody, even though you have different skin and anything, everyone who has lived in that particular area for decades or even generations, why is it so difficult for people to accept that this is where we belong, regardless of where our ancestry or ethnicities are?
Yeah. That's a very loaded question. I definitely think it requires
Yeah,
a lot.
I definitely need to work on that a bit. But yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Um, I guess I'll speak to the former first, and then hopefully just ease into the second aspect that you mentioned.
Sure.
Um, so personally, again, this is coming from someone who has roots, so I might not speak for everyone, but I think there is a beauty in not having roots because your experience becomes so unique. And I never thought that where I came from was unique until I think when I was applying for college. A a family friend told me, "Hey, maybe something you could highlight is the fact that you are Indonesian." And I was like, "Why is that interesting?" And they say, "Well, in the US, they're looking for more international students." And then they also said, "Of course, your perspective as an Indonesian is unique because you're competing against like a bunch of Americans and other international students." And unfortunately, Indonesian students don't really go abroad and even to like a lot of good schools. We're starting to, but back when I applied, it wasn't as frequent as it is now, if that makes sense. Anyway, so that's when I knew that being of an international background is an asset, actually, especially when you're applying to work or to study in a foreign environment. So if just me being from one country is considered an asset, what about me belonging to like, 12 countries, as you said? And I think there's something really beautiful about just not kind of being a nomad in that sense, like a cultural nomad, just because you pick up different things along the way and you mature so much because of where you've lived, and that experience cannot be substituted by having roots in just one country, you know? So I personally think it's not very important, although I do understand the mental health aspect, like the importance of, having a stable community, having a stable, home, like that doesn't move around too much. I do understand that aspect, but from my own perspective, I think it is beautiful to have that kind of unique experience. Because again, right, there are a lot of TCKs, like third culture kids in the world, but at the same time, no one person has the same experience because either they're like me, they have roots in one place and yet have like a melting pot of like different identities, or they're like the person you interviewed who has lived in 12 countries. And even then, if you compare someone who's lived in 12 countries and someone who's lived in 10 countries, they're obviously going to be very different because they've lived in different places, right? Um, and yeah, and that person, those people, I'm sure have amazing stories to tell and are so mature in their views of the world because they've seen it all, and in a way, I'm kind of jealous.
Oh, don't be like that. Don't be like that. Sometimes they will tell you it's actually very confusing.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. I acknowledge that too. Yeah.
Uh, yeah. Uh, yeah, that's why I always, for my opening line, I always tell people this is not an extended vacation.
Yeah.
When you look a certain way, you speak a certain way, people expect you to be this way. I mean, it's normal for humans to want to put you in a box, but the thing is it's not. It's not. Some of us, like I keep on highlighting, is that, well, I grew up in Singapore most of my life. That's where I spent most of my formative years. So I'm sorry, but I do not have my mind does not tune in easily to an Indonesian kind of mindset. It's because most of what I know growing up as a teen all the way to my early 20s, I actually know it's from there. It's from the Lion City. And when I came back here, you expect me to be this way? Is no, I'm not. And I think this is also reflected in your own fictional character Cecilia, is that you expect me to be this way. For somebody who grew up in Los Angeles, for example, somebody who is much more outspoken, I guess, if you can tell. And then you are expected to be quiet down, to be conservative. It's not something that you can immediately do a switch and then you are willing to accept it, because we as human have our own initiative, we have our own perspective, and then you can't just tell us to change it just because this is what is expected of a place,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. And just like to echo on that too, like it definitely ties into the racism that has. I mean, I can only speak for for America. I'm sure this happens in other Western countries, but in the U.S., right? The I think like what you're trying to say is that people tend to try to, you know, put people into different boxes, right? Like as you
Right.
said, it's because you look Indonesian, but you don't feel Indonesian if you feel Singaporean.
To be fair, both of us don't look Indonesian.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So there is kind of this need, I guess, for people to just categorize other people. Um, and I think that's what's happening also in the US, right? Like with the POC or the people of color, where people just try to put us in different boxes. Like the Black community, for example, they're labeled as like lazy and reckless and like crude, which is that's not representative at all of the Black community in America, you know. And the Asian community, as we talked about too, right, is the model minority, right? The people who can't speak up, like the people who are really meek and generally neutral. So because of these attempts to box us up, we get suppressed by white supremacy, right? And unfortunately, we are a byproduct of this long suppression for years and years and years. Um, so it is unfortunate, yes, but I do think, like what you said, it does connect to the bigger picture, right? Of
Right.
generally people wanting to box people up. And especially now, Asians now are, because of Donald Trump, thank you, we are now associated with COVID, right? Like we're
Ah,
blamed for COVID, the Kung flu, as he says. So, um, yeah, it's a very sad reality, but now all Asians are just Asians, and our experiences as like Indonesians, Singaporeans, Chinese, Korean, like Filipino, erased. It's just if you look Asian, you're Chinese and you have COVID. So, um, yeah, that's an added benefit, I guess, of being Asian nowadays. So, yeah,
yippee.
yeah,
Yippee.
yep.
Okay. Well, let's just hope that things will be better. I mean, like as what you said, I've had such platforms such as this in order to be able to speak about this stuff openly and freely and with zero filter. If you need to, it's fine. And we can only move on forward from here is by doing things a little bit differently, I guess. Is that, well, no disrespect to the previous generations. For one thing, is because In the past, everybody's main concern is, of course, providing for the family. It has always been a concern, and we can't. Well, who are we to say that they've done anything wrong? But the thing is that the we have to do it differently. We have to be willing to stand up. And well, tradition is good to have, but sometimes a certain ethnics that doesn't benefit you, and in fact, it causes you long term harm. It has
Correct.
to stop. It really has to stop.
Yeah.
All right. So on the less depressing tone, okay. I hope I ever make you very depressed about this. Sorry. Yeah. What would you hope though for for your readers to actually get from your book?
Yeah.
And what do you hope this can influence the younger generations?
Hmm. Um, I mean, honestly, the book started off um, as a tribute to Indonesia, just because, as a kid, I did read a lot, but I barely saw any books that, was set in Indonesia. And I remember whenever I consumed media as a kid, and I consumed a lot of American media, like, I watched a lot of Disney
Yeah.
Channel,
Same.
Nickelodeon, right?
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
So whenever we saw those shows, they never touch on our part of the region, of like just Asia or even Southeast Asia, which is even more
Well, they
niche.
did. They did for Disney,
Really?
but it was in Singapore. And it was never explicitly stated, however, it's in Singapore or any of that. I think it's just because it's easier to produce the channel there.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I've never seen it. Um, yeah, and like I don't know, I felt really insecure about Indonesia, about being Indonesian as a kid because it was never represented and like people never knew about it. Whenever we went out, people would ask like, "Oh, what is Indonesia?" or like, "Where is it? Is that in Bali?" Like those kind of questions, which I'm sure you've gotten
Bali
too.
is part of Indonesia, you ignoramus.
I know. So yeah, we got a lot of those questions, right? So I've definitely felt really insecure. So part of the reason why I wrote this book was to also represent Indonesia on in Western literature, and hopefully when Indonesian people find it, that they feel proud of their country again. I think that's something that's lacking nowadays, especially after so much turmoil and that this country has gone through over the past few years. I mean, even though it's not perfect, I still love Indonesia, and that's why I want to pay tribute to it. And this is my way of doing so. But I think as I wrote the book, I realized that it's not just a tribute to Indonesia, but it's actually a tribute to people who feel like misfits. Um, and I think that's the same with every piece of literature to some extent. Authors or like writers try to be inclusive, try to like not exclude people, and try to give hope and a voice to the misfits because in a way as artists we are misfits. But I think for me it was coming from my experiences having like imposter syndrome, like going to like a top 10 school in the US was definitely a challenge for me. And just seeing all of my friends at Northwestern just struggling with their own identities was something that I also was very, keen to. Like I saw it happen in front of me, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. So, um, in a way, She Smells of Turmeric became a voice for people who wanted to belong. And the last sentence of my author's note in the book is essentially that, I hope that this book can give you a home if you don't have a home to belong to, because Cecilia's like that, right? Like she's also kind of culturally confused. She like has no idea what's going on. But more than that, she's trying to relate and understand how the different silos of her identity, which is for her like her familial identity, her academic identity, her career identity, and like her friend identity. Does that make sense? Social identity. Sorry. How all of these things combine to create her own self-expression, and that's
Right.
something that a lot of people struggle with, including a lot of TCKs, right?
Right.
With more emphasis on the cultural aspect. So, um, I've never read anything like my book. I'm sure it does exist out there, but in a way, I wish that I had read this book in when I was at my lowest point a couple years ago. So I hope that when people are at their lowest points or even gonna get there and they pick up my book, that they feel a lot better about themselves and they develop a hope, that humanity is a lot warmer than it seems. Yeah.
Very well said. Very, very well said. All
Thank you.
right, that's actually the last question I've had. Okay, so the smell of turmeric is coming up in April 2021. Natasha, how can people actually purchase the book or make a pre-order of it?
Yeah. So it'll be available on Amazon. That's for sure. And in Indonesia, they will be available in local retailers. But you can find more information on my Instagram account at natasha.sondakh. You can also find me on my website, which is www.tashasondakh.com. And yeah, and you'll get more updates there.
All right. And with that, that's the end of episode 86 of Global Citizens, Smelling of Turmeric, Growing Up Between Indonesia and America. So first off, thank you to the viewers who is watching it today. The replay will be available on Instagram TV and it will be available on YouTube. So last but definitely not least, I just want to thank Natasha for making her time here today. And I also actually need to give some shout outs actually. It's because for some reason, I cannot receive the notification for people who send the likes for today. So just give me a second, please. Stop scrolling, scrolling. Okay, so yeah, give me a second, yeah. Okay, so yeah, first off, I need to thank some of my alumni, Miss Megan Norton and Miss Jen Mohindra. Both of them are noted TCK coaches. And last but definitely not least is Mr. Ivan Rianto Gunawan. And with that, we end this episode. Do take care, everyone, and stay safe. And hope your 2021 will be better. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.